One thing I really like about the CX and Culture Connection podcast, it focuses on, practical lessons that I think many people can use. So thank you for the questions and for this discussion, because
Hi, I'm Matt Egol, the host of the CX and Culture Connection podcast, the podcast for business leaders who are looking to accelerate value from their investments in customer experience and culture together. I'm really excited to be here today with Oded and Chris, who are authors of Decisions Over Decimals, and also professors at Columbia. And we'll get into more of that in the podcast and some of the work they're doing. Thanks very much for joining today, guys.
Thank you for having us.
It's great to be here. Thanks, Matt.
I really enjoyed your book, Decisions Over Decimals. I commented in my review of the book that I wish I had read this when I started my consulting career 25 years ago, because it's chock full of really useful tools and methods that you can use to apply quantitative methods together with good decision-making based on intuition. Which in the consulting world, you're always trying to drive change and trying to support decision making, and you don't always have the perfect data. And you can go get the data, but you can also rely on the experience of people, and you're helping drive better organizational effectiveness as part of work. So I really would have benefited from reading this much earlier in my career, and that's why I wanted to recommend it to my audience, that they read the book as well. And actually, in my own book, The CX and Culture Connection, the same name as the podcast, I picked just a few books to feature in my own book at the end of the chapters. And I included your book, my review of your book in there, because I thought it was one of the best that I read. So really kudos to you guys for such amazing work.
Thank you. And thank you for including us in your book, in your comments on the book and in the podcast.
Yeah. So as we dive in, Oded, in the book, you actually tee up this idea of debunking two myths. Do you want to share more what the myths are and why they're myths?
Yes. We talk about two myths. I mean, the first one that we have experienced, Chris, myself, and Paul, actually, our third co-author, Paul Mignone, who's an executive at Google. We've experienced through our interactions with companies, but at this point also teaching thousands of executives, that people are afraid of making decisions with data. And usually the reason is that I wasn't top of my class in math. I'm not that good with numbers. There are people who are really good at that. Let them do that, right? And what we realized, and I've seen, of course, that's a myth, meaning in order to make decisions with data, you don't need to be top of a class in math. In fact, the way I often describe it is there are good news and bad news in this story of making decisions with data. Starting with the bad news, you don't get to choose if you make decisions with data. We all need to make decisions with data. The good news is you don't need to be top of a class in math. In order to do so, there are skills needed. We call this set of skills quantitative intuition, and there are a whole set of skills that come with it. But knowing to do logarithms in your head or being an Excel whiz is not one of them. The second myth has to do with something we call the certainty myth, where I don't know if you remember, but back 2010-ish, big data, capital B, capital D, lots of data, and there was this belief, this hope that with all of this data, we'll get to the nirvana of decision making. Data will make decisions for us. We will have this certain perfect decision, right? And you even mentioned before, Matt, you said sometimes we don't have the perfect data. I would take this sentence even further. We never have the perfect data. And we never have the perfect decision either, which means certainty is a myth. As we now know, a few years post the hype of big data, but also the fact that we do have much more data than we ever had, we still reside with uncertainty. We still need to make decisions with uncertainty. And feeling comfortable with that is a big part of what we talk about in the book and what we talk about in this framework of quantitative intuition.
That's wonderful. When we think about quantitative intuition, how it's combining data intuition, one of the things I've always really found interesting is kind of setting the right context for decision making, really understanding what decision you're really trying to make. you guys talk about I wish I knew statements and kind of really laying out up front the context, the learning journey. What are you trying to do? I'd love to get you to kind of talk a little bit more about how do you set the right context for decision making before you dive into actually making decisions.
Yeah, Matt. I'll jump in here. You actually touched on what we talk about in the book as the two critical thinking skills that you need to be successful. So if it's not you don't need to be top in your class in math. So what do you need? And the two things that we talk about and we've been teaching for 8 years now at Columbia is the ability to frame the problem, frame the outcome, frame the decision. And the second thing is context. And the ability, and we have actually asked a single question for about the past 8 or 9 years, and we have over thousands of responses. And it's what we call the U-shaped issue. You need to really build a strength and a discipline and a skill at the front in terms of framing. And then you need to come to the other side and understand context for your recommendation and decision, and always discuss your recommendation, your analysis, your data in context. And let me break that down for you. So when we talk about framing, a great analogy is to think of it as you're taking a picture. Too often when we think around making a decision with data, we want to open up the lens to almost a panoramic view. I want as much data. I want to look as much. And what you wind up getting is a beautiful big picture, but not a lot of detail, not something you could do something with. So the ability to frame, the ability to actually go from a panoramic view down to almost a macro view, what do we need to decide? That is a real skill, and that's a discipline. So that's what we talk about framing. When we talk about context, it's something we call the context triangle. And the context triangle, as we discuss it in the book, is whenever you talk about data or a recommendation, you always talk about it in absolute. You talk about it relative to some benchmark or norm, and you talk about it over time. And when you think about any piece of recommendation through that lens, you're going to wind up in a much smarter, much more effective place, and also with the faster decision.
Building on that, I think that Einstein said, it's not that I'm smart, I'm just spending more time with the problem. A lot of what we do in thinking through quantitative intuition and the framework is how do we create mechanism to almost force us to spend more time with the problem, because our tendency is to drive straight into solution mode. Our tendency is to say, oh, let's crunch some numbers, let's see what's going on, because it feels like work. Spending time on the problem is actually harder work and more work than looking at the data and crunching numbers. It just doesn't feel like work. And we are trying to build processes for, like iWeeks that you mentioned, this I week I knew method of ask people in the organization, what is it that you wish you knew before I go into it all, look at data. And there is this irony in it that if you're a company that has tons of data, it's very important for you to think carefully about the context and the problem, because otherwise you're going to drown in the data. You have way too much data. If you're a company that doesn't have data at all, it's going to be very costly to get the data. You better frame the problem, because otherwise you're going to spend way too much time looking for data. So ironically, whether you are very rich in data or very poor in data, it's super important to frame the problem first.
100%. I've done a number of projects myself on whether it's framed as the analytics strategy of how are we using data analytics to make better decisions in the organization, or customer experience, or digital transformation. Anytime you do this, you're effectively helping the organization decide how they're going to engage on a set of opportunities that are more data-driven to drive decision-making, to drive experience design, to drive continuous improvement efforts. And if you don't start with the end in mind of what are the things we're trying to improve, you can swirl a lot, right? And so in the case of analytics, as an example, we'll often say, don't look at the data and the technology until you think about the use cases. Otherwise, it's totally unbounded, and you're just going to bounce from thing to thing and be very reactive to what's in front of you at the moment. And you can't get people aligned on a set of priorities. So, and the other thing is, if you want to Think about customer listening as an example. Everyone's using AI now. Like how do we mine sentiment? How do we mine the call center? There's a huge amount of unstructured data that's orders of magnitudes higher than the surveys that companies ask for NPS and things like that. And one hotel client, they had 20x the volume of unstructured data as they had post-stay surveys, and it's growing exponentially. But if you don't start with what I want to learn from this and just start mining trends, you're just going to spin your wheels.
Right. With data-driven, there's a bit of irony. We talk about a data-driven decision, but data is the supporting character in that movie. And your main character is the decision. So this technique around I wish I knew, it's a very, powerful tool that you can use with your key stakeholders at all levels. I've used it up to the C-suite, all the way through to external agency partners. And it really takes the your internal client or external partner outside of the, being down into the weeds to say, what do you wish you knew? Forget the analysis, forget the data. Let's not get tied up into research objectives or business outcomes. If I could deliver the right information to you at the right time, whether it be this week, this month, this quarter, if I could answer one question for you or two questions for you, what do you wish you knew? And it is a game changer, I have to tell you, Matt, because once you give them that permission, what it does is it changes the dialogue. And we call it the dream the impossible dream question. If we could answer it for you, let me worry as the analyst about whether I can answer it, how I'm going to answer it, and the methodology. Let's set that all aside. We are here to actually, help grow our business. And at the core, that's what we're all trying to do. Every essential business question, decision comes down to that. How can we grow? And with iWick, what can I deliver to you to help you grow, to help you drive a better outcome?
This framing, and I wish I knew, is so critical up front. Often we don't spend enough time on it. It can be used in scoping the work to figure out which things deserve attention to focus on, and then scoping the right effort, whether it's internally or with an external support at all. Often just asking the right questions and framing up the right problem statements is the first step. There's enormous value in just that. And then when you're early in the effort of you're driving more effective decision making and make progress on those decisions, it's part of change management, just to get people to discuss, like you said, Chris, what are the decisions that you want addressed? Like what should this effort solve? And if you learn that you're answering the wrong questions, pivot.
There's also it's almost like a secret weapon. It not only helps you, it's not only a powerful technique to help you frame the problem up front, but on the back end, when you go to deliver your recommendation or deliver your analysis, you start with their question. Remember we spoke last month and you said, if I could answer, this one question, and Oded, myself, and Paul, we all, come from the world of business. We all work on the front lines. And one of the things that we do is we will start a presentation with their question. Not with methodology, not with statistical, distributions and analytic models. We're here to answer this. And guess what? This is what they asked. And you want to see, they will actually lean in. And they're like, you're actually going to answer that? First of all, you listen to me. And two, you're actually going to answer it. So it drives engagement. And at the end of the day, we all care about driving impact and action from our recommendations.
Yeah.
And one of the things we recommend in the course, as well as in the book, is this notion of working backwards. And working backwards from a decision. So it's not even the problem that we are trying to solve. We are trying to start from what is the decision at hand. Tell me what decision you need to make. And then tell me what are your iWeeks, what data do you wish you knew in order to be able to make that a decision. In other words, even rather than saying data-driven decisions, we should be in the business of decision-driven data analysis. Start with what is the decision on the table, and let's make sure that we're getting to the end where we can actually make that decision. And a company that I split my time between Columbia and Amazon. And Amazon is obviously a company that's known to work backwards. And they have several techniques to do that. One of them is something called PRFAQ, Press Release Frequently Asked Question, where day one, day two, or early on in a project, you're actually going to write a press release. We just introduce the product. Here are the description of the product, the need, the customer need, how does the product answer the need, and then FAQs, the IWeeks, in other words, of what you want to answer. And this document is being used to decide very early on, are we going to invest in it or not?
This is a really powerful tool. I don't always use the same names as the ones you have in the book, but some of them, like the 5 whys or things like that have been taught, but I see a lot of them. I say, oh yeah, this is really powerful. I see how this has worked in the past. Like, this notion of backcasting or thinking of the future, and then what did you have to do to get there, is really powerful when you want to drive innovation or change in the organization or get people to work together in new ways, even for culture evolution. In fact, in the book, my book, CX and Culture Connection, I talk about an acronym for culture where, CULTURE are all stand for something, and it's a methodology to create a flywheel. And the L is for look ahead 3 years and visualize your company after you've successfully implemented these changes. What did you have to do to get there? What you just described is L in the book.
Right.
Yeah, I love that. I'd love to dive a little bit more into intuition. I have a few questions about intuition. One of the things is like, often I've heard the distinction made between business intuition and strategic intuition. In fact, I think a Columbia professor wrote about that. By the way, we can geek out on this. I think you guys know, I'm a Columbia Business 98, and I wish your class were taught when I was there, because it would have been great to take it. But better late than never.
We teach exec ed, so you're welcome to come back to campus.
I can go back to school
and you get a discount as an alum.
Yeah, and I've been on campus. I actually led Columbia recruiting for Booz and PwC, and half my employees at JourneySpark are from Columbia, so I'll definitely take you guys up on that. I think business intuition is often viewed sometimes in a pejorative sense about like thinking inside the box and like don't be limited, and you want to broaden your view outside of your box. But actually what you highlight in the book is not so fast. Business intuition is actually really valuable to complement data and analytics, and you just need to know when you're applying intuition and how, and there are ways to broaden people's perspective beyond their business intuition. But you can actually, I'd love to get you to talk about what do you mean by intuition? Can you teach it? How do you apply it?
Yes, on the teaching intuition, this is a question we often being asked. You say, okay, fine, quantitative, we know you can teach quantitative skills. We've been taught quantitative skills since we were in kindergarten, pretty much, calling it math and algebra and then geometry, then calculus, just statistics, change the name. But can you teach intuition? Isn't intuition something so primal that you either have it or not, right? People that are really good intuitive people. The theory of learning suggests that there are 2 dimensions to learning. There is consciousness and competence. At the lowest level of learning, we are so clueless that we don't even know what we don't know. And then, we log into a podcast, right? And suddenly we hear this term, quantitative intuition. We say, oh, that sounds interesting. Oxymoron, kind of quantitative intuition don't go together.
They not only log in, but they subscribe to the podcast.
Subscribe and listen, and all the way until the end. And suddenly you hear this quantitative intuition. You're like, oh, that's interesting. In fact, you log in first to see that just the term, and you just jump to step number 2, which is you are now consciously incompetent. You know what you don't know. You're at least conscious about the things you don't know. But because you subscribed and you start listening to the podcast itself, suddenly you start learning about what it is. And we already talked about a few tools like iWeeks. And now you're saying, okay, I just jumped to step number 3. I'm consciously competent. I know, and I even know what to do. I haven't tried it at work yet, so I need to trust Chris that his iWeek works for him in his career. But I mean, I at least am consciously competent. It requires a lot of conscious effort. At the highest level of learning, we get to nirvana. We get to unconscious competence. We get to the level where habit, intuition, second nature, right? Where we do something over and over again. And if you think about, I mean, of course, things like riding a bike or driving a car, but even if you think about our work life, most of the decisions we make, email gets in, email gets out, it's all pretty much working with what Daniel Kahneman calls system one thinking, in this intuitive thinking. And it is because we've done it over and over again. And that's what business intuition means. It comes from experience. It comes from doing things over and over again and getting the sense for it. So at the end of the day, experience and intuition is also data. It's just your previous data that brought you to where you are.
I think this is, to kind of pull on this thread a little bit, what you're talking about is the nexus between mindset, skills, and behaviors, right? And that in culture, we often think about a culture, how things are done around here, and you want to see customer experience. The name of the podcast in the book is how customer experience and culture go together, CX and culture connection. Well, culture is about how things are done, and culture can enhance the flow of energy in the company, or it can create friction. And you want positive flow of energy versus creating negative, swirl in the company or getting people to be repelled and leave. You want it to be an attractor versus something that repels people, And a lot of what you write about in the book is actually building a culture of better decision-making and empowerment and the rights. But if you have skills and mindsets, it's actually not enough without behavior. And then when you start making it more behavioral, you can act your way into new mindsets, and it actually becomes system one. You just do it regularly. So what you're highlighting is building trust in your intuition and knowing how to apply it, right? And knowing how to collaborate with other people and pull their intuition in where it's valuable.
Yeah, I think you're spot on, Matt, in terms of culture. In fact, there's a whole chapter dedicated to how do you hire the right people, and how do you build what we call a QI culture? Because what gets as the old adage is, what gets measured gets done. And I think if we actually pause and truly ask ourselves and hold up a mirror, everything is getting measured, less is getting done. Decisions are not faster, better, or smarter, or more efficient just because we have the data. So we actually talk about 4 specific roles in the book that you should hire for. And in fact, that was so compelling that recently it was picked up by Harvard Business Review about a month ago. How do you hire for critical thinking skills? And how do you hire for these quantitative intuition skills that are so needed today? And there's a whole model and technique we talk about called the flip interview, which is really grounded in, inversing the interview, taking a very fresh approach, and really leaning into the power of questioning. So I think you're spot on when you talk about culture and the need to embed that to enable far faster, smarter decisions.
For me, my driving motivation to launch my own company, JourneySpark Consulting, is to help companies. It's not just the customer journey; it's the companies on a journey, and the employees are on a journey. It's a layered metaphor, and I want to spark that energy, spark that flow of energy along the journey. And for me, I've always been passionate about culture. Being a strategist who's grown up in industries disrupted by the internet, media and entertainment and retail and consumer and other industries that's how I got into customer experience. I've always approached from a culture lens of like, how does the organization and the talent need to evolve to be able to work in new ways and take advantage of these opportunities. So I've been very fortunate to work with really interesting people and clients in that area. And, what I really would love to get, your thoughts about is, what do you see as examples of what companies need to pay attention to other than hiring and skills to build a QI culture, to build a culture? Where do you start? Where do you focus to take advantage of those opportunities or to really nurture them?
I think one of the key things, in fact, if there is a thread that goes throughout the entire book, it's this thread of asking questions, of the power of questions, a place where we value questions at least as much as we value answers. And actually, Chris, Paul, and I would argue value questions more than you value answers. The smartest person in the room is the one that asks really good questions, not the person who always has the answers. And that's why we call it the flip interview, because it's often flipped. The way we hire people, we bring in a person and we are asking them questions, expect them to give answers. Let's test them on their ability to ask questions. And these questions vary as we go through different stages of a project, for example. Early on, these questions are more like IWICs. What is it that you wish you knew? As we go, for example, through interrogating the data and interrogating the process, a question that we think is crucial, and it's a part of what could be in a culture or needs to be in a culture of a company, is asking what surprised you. What is surprising for you in the data? What is surprising for you in the environment? What is surprising for you in the context?
I'm going to bring it back a little bit to behavior for a minute, if you allow me. So if we want to build habit loops, if we want to drive new behaviors to reinforce, I think what you guys call a questioning mindset in the book, and how important, I love that, how important a questioning mind, and how you interview for that, how you train for that, how you reinforce norms and behaviors in the culture around this. Well, you could actually say, how do you drive behavior change in an organization? Well, when this happens, instead of doing this, I'm going to do this, right? And I use a platform called Actionable to reinforce that, so that you can reinforce behavior and actually track behavior adoption at companies. I had Chris Taylor, the CEO of Actionable, on a podcast earlier to talk about this. And, what I find in culture behavior movements is there's not enough attention spent on what are the behaviors you want, and then getting people to spot those behaviors and to take actions that are authentic, that reinforce them, that don't always have to be formal reward mechanisms or formal incentives, but just getting people to know the behaviors you want and to model the behaviors, and to, when someone does it, to kind of give the pat on the back, to celebrate it, to do things that reinforce and make sure it gets adopted, and that people have space to adopt it. And would love to, what do you guys think, and what do you see as effective at driving adoption of questioning mindset behaviors?
Yeah, one of the things that we see is, and it's actually, pretty simple, is to create that learning environment. And that is the most, we all want to hire, if you look at any job description or any aspiration of any hiring manager, I want to hire curious people. I want to hire people that will fall in love with the problem. And that's great. But as a leader, what you want to do is create a learning environment. And the way you do that is, one, by asking questions. For example, Oded mentioned this question, what surprised you? What surprised you basically says, I am opening up the dialogue to you to tell me, not what the answer is, but what didn't you expect? What was the new learning? What is something in the data that, you didn't plan for? And what do many good analysts do when they see a data point that they don't understand? What do we call that, Matt? It's an outlier. And where do we put outliers? In the appendix, probably on about page 65. Because as an analyst, you could say, it was in the deck. What do you mean you didn't see the 8-point font? An 8-point font does exist, but the profitable answers, the unexpected answers, the answers that will not just help a company grow, but help a company win, is in those surprising moments. So as a leader, to reinforce that culture of, learning, asking a question such as, what surprised you? Going around and asking a question, such as, help me understand. three powerful words to start a question. Chris, you're saying, I am open to learning. Help me understand. So those are just two very pragmatic techniques that we discuss in the book. And in fact, we also do corporate training. And because we live on the front lines, we have developed a series of very successful and practical techniques that anyone could adopt to start to build that culture change. Oded, I don't know if you have additional perspective.
Yeah, I think that another way to think about the behavior, one of the pillars that we talk about in quantitative intuition is synthesis, is getting teams to synthesize data as opposed to summarize data. And the difference between summary and synthesis is that synthesis is summary plus judgment. It is moving from what to so what and now what. What does it mean for us and what are we going to do about it? And, our again, third co-author, Paul, he often says the reason why I wrote the book is because I was sick of bad meetings, right? Meetings that go around the whats and another what and another what. And there is actually a persona we talk about in the book. We call them the Seymours on the organization. Organizations are flooded with Seymours. We've all met them. Seymours are these people in the organization that in every meeting they have only one comment. I want to see more data. And we can postpone any decision forever just by asking to see more data. It is that type of behavior where we are saying, I'm expecting of you as a culture in the organization, as behavior in the organization, not to come back to me and just describing what you've seen in the data, but rather tell me what does it mean and what are we going to do about it. And if you come back to me only with telling me, here is the data and here's an insight, the response should be, what does it mean? What are we going to do about it, right? And even in meetings, putting an alarm into the meeting, 45 minutes into the meeting to say, look, we talked about the what, we disagree about all kinds of things, analysts going to go and get better data, but we're going to spend the last 15 minutes of this meeting asking ourselves, what does this data mean for us? What is a so what? And what are next actions for us? And next action shouldn't be just let's collect more data, but rather, as a company, what are we going to do? We are here in the business of making decisions.
One senior partner I worked with earlier in my career used to say, don't admire the problem, which is to constantly look at the data, look at the problem, and try to look at all the complexity of it. There's a place for that to understand things. But if you don't actually think about what decision we're trying to make here, what data do I need, what's it going to do to get alignment, and just start swirling and admiring the problem, you just waste everyone's time. Yeah, and you can get sucked into that of just spending lots and lots of time in a meeting admiring the problem, everything that could be challenging or wrong, or you're missing data, and we're just analyzing the facts without actually asking, what are we trying to achieve, but what are we trying to decide?
And we're sometimes even over-admiring insights, because we admire cocktail party insights, but is it an insight that we can act on, right? It's great that we say, this whole journey led to this beautiful insight that even was a surprise. If it's not actionable, it's a nice cocktail party insight.
So I really enjoyed our conversation. Thank you so much for taking the time to share your experience, and I highly recommend the book to the audience, Decisions Over Decimals, and you can see the review of it in my own book at the end of chapter 4. I'd love for you guys to share more. Other than buying the book, what can people do to engage, on this topic? Whether it's in Quantive or Columbia, if they're involved there, what can they do to get connected with you and to get engaged on the topics we talked about today?
So first of all, Matt, really enjoyed this podcast. I mean, one thing I really like about this CX and Culture Connection podcast, it focuses on, practical lessons that I think many people can use. So thank you for the questions and for this discussion, because it was terrific. So we do get the question often, if I can't get up to Columbia, how could I, work with you? There's actually a couple ways you could connect with us. First of all, we do bespoke training. And in fact, we made that very accessible. They're like 90-minute sessions, and you could and you could reach out to us via inquantive.com, and you'll see that on the screen. Second thing is DOD the book. You could reach us via DOD the book, or connect with us on LinkedIn, or all three.
Thank you, guys. It's been wonderful. I look forward to future collaboration, both at Columbia and personally. And I'm really excited by the ideas in your book and applying them myself. And thanks for sharing that. And I'm confident that this idea not only sparks some ideas for me, but I hope sparks some great ideas for our audience too. So thank you.
Yeah, thank you, Matt. Thank you, the listeners, and thank you for a wonderful conversation.